وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. To Samahat Sayyid Hassan al-Qazwini and brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum. It's my pleasure and honor to be here with you this morning. I'm the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CAIR, and we've been here several times over the years. And before I call up my colleague, our staff attorney, Sister Amy, let me make two comments before calling her up. Number one, and I say this with all sincerity, when I come to this community, in this particular Islamic institution, I am not a visitor here. I'm part of this community. I am part of this community. We are the same community, and I come here all the time to seek Sayyid Hassan's advice, and I come here also to pray. When I'm in this vicinity, I come here and pray in this Islamic institution. This is number one. Number two is that we as a Muslim community, alhamdulillah, 20 years after the tragedy of 9/11, we've gone through a lot of things. And we still face a number of challenges as a community. A number of these things tend to be a little more subtle, and they're not as bad as they used to be, as when the FBI was going door to door, knocking on our doors, in Dearborn in particular after 9/11, or when that crazy guy, Terry Jones, came here to burn the Quran. Alhamdulillah, our community, we don't face the same amount of challenges that we were even facing, let's say, 5-7 years ago. Allahu Azza wa Jal has given us relief. But in saying that, and before we go into particulars of this issue, that our civil rights and civil liberties as Americans, they have to be known and they have to be exercised. America is the type of place that if you don't stand up for yourself, you will get rolled over. If you don't stand up for yourself and exercise your rights will be taken from you. This is how it works in this society. The American society, although we have the rule of law in the society, this place is not for the weak-hearted, right? We will always be challenged and we will be tested as a community. And unfortunately, as we are about to hear, there's still a level of targeting that takes place against Muslims in regards to our international travels, flying back into the country and in land borders. And in particular for this community, it relates also that there are certain communities who tend to be profiled more flying back from certain countries, right? And I can just list for you some of these countries before Sister Amy comes up. People who are flying back from Iran, from Ziyara, get targeted. A number of people who fly back and forth regularly from Lebanon have been targeted and stopped. People coming back from Syria, from Iraq, and also from Yemen. These are some of the countries in which people get stopped and harassed the most. We really don't get a lot of complaints. Let's say, for instance, like just to let you know, in Metro Detroit, we have, alhamdulillah, we have 80 masajid in Metro Detroit, alhamdulillah. 20 years ago, we didn't even have, but maybe half of that 20 years ago, if that. We have 80. Many of you might be, this might surprise you, but in Detroit alone, there are 2 Islamic centers of people just from Nigeria. You have Masjid Nasrullah on the far east side off of Harper Road, Harper Avenue, and then you have one off of 6 Mile, or also called West McNichols on the west side of Detroit. As corrupt as Nigeria is portrayed in the news and Boko Haram, we don't get cases in our office of Nigerian Americans who are Muslims flying back from Nigeria getting stopped, right? It's certain countries, and primarily countries from the so-called Middle East. I don't like using the term Middle East because the British came up with this term. Muslims never use this term. The Far East, Middle East, Near East, these are terms that British colonizers came up with, so maybe we need to stop using those words. But really, it's only from certain so-called Middle Eastern countries where people get profiled at the most. So with that, I will call up my colleagues, Sister Amy, who's our staff attorney. She will give the bulk of the presentation. Then we will have a question and answer session. And I will be with Sister Amy for the question and answer session, though she will answer most of the questions. So without any further ado, Sister Amy is our staff attorney at CAIR Michigan.
Assalamu alaikum. Before I give the bulk of the presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about what Brother Dawud said, because what he said is absolutely correct. We take statistics in our office of the kinds of travelers that are being stopped. And what we see is there's a large majority of people who are being stopped at the border who are either of Lebanese, Iranian, Iraqi, or Syrian descent, or who have traveled to those 4 countries in particular. And what we also see is that there is a steady increase of the amount of electronic devices that are being seized at the border. And we're talking cell phones, tablets, laptops, you name it. If it's an electronic device, they're taking it at the border. And one of the reasons that they're doing this is one of the federal courts out of New York made a determination that you have no privacy rights to your electronic devices at the border. That decision came out in February of 2021. And what it actually means is that the Customs and Border Protection can take your electronic device and search it in the same manner that they search your belongings, like your physical luggage, your carry-on, your purse, and things like that. So this decision is very problematic for travelers. It's electronic devices in general are sort of a new area of law. The law is always 10 steps behind technology, honestly, and we carry a lot of information on our electronic devices that is now subject to being searched for no reason at all. Before that, they had to have a reasonable suspicion that there was evidence of a crime on your electronic device. They, at this moment in time, don't need that anymore. And what we've seen since February 2021 is that CBP is more emboldened to take people's electronic devices. We are seeing more and more electronic devices seized every month under this new rule. So that's why we're here, to talk about what your rights are at the border and how you protect yourself at the border. So one thing that's very important to remind ourselves is that when we travel internationally, whether it's by air or if we're just going to Canada now that the Canadian border is open, that you have very limited rights at the border. If you're a US citizen, you have some rights at the border. You have some rights to refuse to answer questions, and you have some rights to refuse different types of searches at the border. If you're a lawful permanent resident, you can put up a little bit of a fight at the border. You can refuse to answer some questions, but whether or not you refuse to let them open your electronic device becomes a different issue. And if you are a visa holder of any sort other than a lawful permanent resident, whether you're here on a visitor visa, whether you're here on a student visa, or whether you're here on a work visa, you don't have any constitutional rights at the border, which means they can ask you questions that they want to, and they can deny you entry. And I like to remind people that a visa to enter the United States is like permission to come here, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be let in. It's like you can knock at the door and they can decide whether they're gonna open it. So if you are here on a visa, you need to be a little bit more careful about what we're doing at the border. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. However, there are some types of questions at the border that are not permissible for anybody. And that includes questions about your religion, questions about your politics, questions about your social media accounts. Like, you don't have to give them access to your social media accounts unless you're a visa holder. And questions about how you feel about things that are going on overseas. None of those questions are permissible at the border. When you come to the border to get entry back into the United States, you have to present your ID. And for most of us, the questions that they can ask us have to do with what's on our ID. Our name, our birth date, where we live. You have to answer questions about where we've traveled, and that includes all of the countries that you've traveled to, even if you've just transitioned to a country, like through a country to your final destination. For instance, when we traveled back to my husband's country, we transitioned through both Germany and Brussels. So we would have to say that we went to Germany, Brussels, and then his home country. So even if you've just transitioned through, you have to let them know that you've been there, especially if you had to get off the plane and they put a stamp, for like an EU stamp in your passport. So it becomes very important, but you do not have to answer about the specific places that you went once you were inside of the country that you're traveling to. You have to answer questions about the nature of your visit. For instance, I went there to visit my family, or I went there for a religious pilgrimage, or I went there for business. But you don't have to say, I went to this person's house, and I went to this address. And sometimes they like to try to make us answer those questions, but you don't really have to do that. You have to talk about where generally you went and where and what the purpose of your overall purpose of your visit is. Those are all permissible questions. What we've seen is that Muslims are 10 times more likely to get called into what's called secondary screening. And secondary screening is where they take you to a different room or a different location. Sometimes they just take you off to the side. And oftentimes they use plainclothes individuals instead of people who are in a Customs and Border Protection uniform. And then they want to ask you more invasive questioning. A lot of times they will go through all of your luggage and they'll ask you to see your electronic device. We've seen very recently people who are carrying books, especially religious books, or books that are in a different language, such as Arabic, are having their books seized at the airport. And they're being questioned about the contents of those written materials. So if you're a US citizen, you can absolutely refuse to answer questions about the types of books or the types of handwritten notes and things that you're carrying in your luggage. It's none of their business. If you're a lawful permanent resident, you can decline to answer those types of questions about those books and handwritten notes, but they could give you more of a problem and they can hold you longer. If you're here on a different type of visa, you might want to answer those questions, because if you don't, refusing to answer those questions could subject you to having to return to your home country before you're even allowed into the United States. So we need to be very aware of the types of materials that we're coming back and forth with into the United States. If they bring you in for secondary questioning and they start to ask you questions about who your family members are, what's your brother's name, or they have your brother's name. Sometimes we see they have your family members' names even when those family members have never been inside the United States. They'll say, we know your brother Isa lives over in this specific city overseas. What does he do for a living? You don't have to answer those types of questions, but we do see them asking those types of questions. They want to know what your family does for a living, where they're residing here and where they're residing overseas. Those are not permissible questions at the border. And you can refuse to answer, especially if you're a lawful permanent resident or a US citizen. But what you need to do is you need to be aware of your rights and you need to be firm in your rights. You can say, I'm not at the border to talk about my family. I respectfully decline to answer those questions. Or you can say, I'm not going to answer any questions that don't have to do with my international travel. And then you can just remain silent when they ask you those questions. You don't have to say anything further. Something else that we see is that they like to bring people who speak your language. So if you are a native Arabic speaking person, they'll bring somebody who speaks Arabic. Or sometimes they'll bring somebody even from your own country and your home country, and they'll want to just have a conversation with you, and they'll start chatting with you about what it's like overseas and how was your trip. And what they're really trying to do is engage you in a conversation to get you to open up about your personal life in a way that you normally wouldn't if you realize you're being questioned. So all of those conversations are official conversations, and we need to be aware of that. So we need to say, brother, I respect, that we're from the same place, but I'm not going to answer your questions. And you really just, that's as simple as that. Just saying, I respectfully decline to answer your questions is enough for them to stop asking questions. One of the things that people think, as Muslims, we try to be helpful, we try to be good citizens, we say, I don't have anything to hide, let me just answer their questions. And we kind of think that that's going to make it easier for us. And I can guarantee you it has never made it easier for anybody. If you answer questions the first time, they're going to ask you more and more questions. They're going to keep you there longer and longer. And next thing you know, you've been there almost 7 hours answering questions that are not really constitutional and have nothing to do with your entry at the border. And now when you say you're not going to answer any more questions, they get upset. And then you have a problem. And then the next time you come in, they stop you again. And they stop you again, and they stop you again. And then you have FBI coming to your house to follow up with you on the answers that you gave to the CBP officer at the border. So it's always better not to answer questions other than those questions that you're required to answer on inspection at the border. My mom always told me, like literally she said, it's really a lot easier to say no from the first time than it is to stop doing something that you've already agreed to do, because people have a tendency to be angrier when you've agreed to do something and then you withdraw your consent. So it's better just to say no. And like Brother Dawud said, this is a country of rights, and this is a country that prides itself on our ability to exercise our rights. And as good U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, we should be free to exercise our rights regardless of the fact that they're targeting us because of our religion. We don't have to give anything up to prove how loyal we are to our country. That's not our responsibility. And we definitely don't have to do any of that. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your electronic devices. It is very, very important that you secure your electronic devices with a passcode. It can be any type of passcode. It can be a number, it can be alphabetical, it can be like a word, it can be those swipe patterns that people have. I know that's a popular one amongst the kids. But what it cannot be your face or your fingerprints. So if you have an iPhone like a lot of us do, they have that face identification that can open your phone. If your face can open your phone, CBP and actually any law enforcement that stops you even on the street can have access to your phone just by waving the phone in front of your face. And the Supreme Court of Michigan and other federal district courts have determined that that is not a violation of your privacy, because you have no privacy right in how your face looks on the outwardly. So if you secure your electronic device with a face or a thumbprint, when you're traveling across the border, it's imperative to turn that feature off. So we should be turning that off completely. And we should definitely have a passcode on our device. If they do seize your electronic device, which they do a lot now, and it's sometimes very, very punitive, especially iPhones are very difficult to break into, even with a passcode. And Apple is not really, they don't really collaborate with the government, and they're not very cooperative when the government tries to have them allow access to your device. So if you have one of those, a passcode can really protect them from actually getting any of your information off of it. And that goes for all of our devices. I know some of us like to travel with our laptop. I have to travel with my laptop for work. You have to have a passcode on your laptop as well, because if they take it, then they have to go through extra steps to be able to get into it, and it can secure your information. Some things that CBP is looking for on your device are things that are counterintuitive to what we might think that they're looking for, but really they're looking for images, videos, social media, and your actual telephone and email contacts. They want to see where Muslims are going, who we're taking pictures of with, what we're taking pictures of, and we know that they bring these pictures back and they ask you questions. We know that they're trying to see how Muslims are connected on social media, who might be our friend contacts on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever other social media outlets there are. They want to see what kind of groups we're in on WhatsApp. They want to see who we're talking to here and who we're talking to overseas, so they can see how interconnected our communities are and see who we might be in contact with here and overseas. And I can guarantee you, we've had more than one person come into our office and say that they stopped me because they said they found my phone number in somebody else's phone, and I don't know that person, but we are in a WhatsApp group together. I've seen his name in our WhatsApp group. So they are literally mapping our community. But there are ways that you can protect yourself with regards to your electronic devices. And the first thing is, when we travel, we should be traveling with a phone that has the least amount of information on it as possible. If you have a phone that has access to your bank accounts, to your social media, maybe leave that phone at home and get a phone that you use just to travel with. not everybody can do that, but if you can, that's a good thing. But if you can't do that, what we should be doing is we should be utilizing a cloud-based storage system as much as possible. I'm not out here advocating for any specific one, but I can tell you I'm not that technologically inclined, so I use Google. And I know that if I sign up into Google, all of my photos will back up to my Google account. All of my contacts will back up to my Google account. And then I can sign out of my Google account and everything is gone off of my phone. My contacts, my images, everything. So that's a good way to travel, is if we sign out of, we use a cloud-based storage system and we sign out of everything as we're traveling. And you can do that with everything. It's very important also that if you're traveling internationally, you should not be saving your passwords and your links to social media on your actual device, because if they have your device, they have access to your social media accounts with your passcode. They can open up your messages, and every single social media outlet that I know of has a messaging device where people can message you back and forth on it, so they can have access to all of that. So we want to sign out of all of our apps, period, and then we want to make Google or iCloud forget the passwords. That way that if they take your device, they don't have your passwords to be able to access those things. And we also see that they're taking people's devices punitively. So if you won't let them open it, they'll take it. But that's a catch-22. Because if you let them open it, they're taking it and they're downloading all of your information while you're sitting there and giving you the device back after they've already done what they want. And now you can't fight that downloading of your information because technically you've consented. Consent is a big deal in the United States. Without consent, there are ways to challenge everything. If they take your electronic device, CAIR Michigan has, and we do, on a regular basis, challenge that seizure of your device. We have a Fourth Amendment that protects us from illegal search and seizure, including of your electronic devices. And if you don't consent to them opening it, you can fight the seizure of your electronic device, including requesting that they destroy any information that they've been able to obtain, if in fact they are able to access your device. So those are some ways to protect your electronic device. So just to recap, we're going to put a passcode on our electronic device, even if it's just our kid's tablet. We are going to use cloud-based storage, and we're going to sign out of cloud-based storage, and we're going to travel with a phone that doesn't have that much information on it, back and forth. The other thing is, I know this community and some other communities, we have passports other than our U.S. passports. And we travel sometimes in and out of different countries with that passport because we don't have to pay for a visa. It's cheaper, it's easier. We don't have the scrutiny that we have on U.S. passport. If you travel somewhere on a passport other than the U.S. passport, you still have to notify the U.S. that you've done that, even if you're not carrying that passport with you. We've seen very recently people have a problem because they were traveling on a Lebanese passport into Iran, and they didn't disclose that to the U.S. government upon their return, and that's a problem. Because believe me, the U.S. government knows where we're going, whether or not we use our passport, because we carry an electronic location device with us at all times by way of our cell phone, where we've tagged ourselves on social media in a picture, and it gives the location. So they know you're there. So it doesn't help to lie about it, and that's a 7-year felony. That's the other thing, I think the last thing that I want to bring up is, if you're being questioned by Customs and Border Protection, it is imperative, and really any law enforcement, whether it's CBP, the state police, your local police department, or the FBI, it is imperative that you do not lie. It's better to say nothing at all than to tell a lie. Because if you tell a lie, you can be charged with a felony. And it doesn't even have to be a lie that matters. It's literally any lie at all. And it is a 7-year felony, and the FBI does prosecute them. We know of people who've been prosecuted because they told the FBI they have one Facebook account when they have 2, and they got charged with a 7-year felony. And the fact that he had 2 Facebook accounts was completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. It didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. That little lie got him charged with a felony. So it's very important that you do not lie to the law enforcement, but it's also important to know they definitively can lie to you. And it's a tactic they use on a regular basis. Law enforcement will lie and say, we heard this, or we saw this, or we know this, and they've made it up. But you cannot lie to them. So I think that's the last thing that I want to talk about today. I do want to say, though, if you are here on a visa other than a lawful permanent resident card or you're a U.S. citizen, you do have to open your phone at the border. Because if you don't, they will take your phone and turn you around, but you don't have that protection at the border. You definitively have to open your phone and let them search your phone. So I think that's the last thing. I'm going to bring Brother Dawud up, and then we can answer some questions, inshallah, if anybody has any specific questions that they'd like to ask. Yes, brother.
If you're a U.S. citizen and you come into the country with your visa, do you have to open your phone?
So I think this is streaming on social media, so I'm going to repeat the question for people who might not have been able to hear it. The question is whether or not, if you're a U.S. citizen, do you have to open your phone? And the answer is no, absolutely not. U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents do not have to open their phone when CBP asks, nor do they have to provide the password to CBP. They'll say, give me your password, and if you're a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you can say, absolutely not, I'm not doing that.
What about your laptop?
Any electronic device. The rule is the same for all electronic devices.
Can they take them?
They can take them. They can take them. Opening them is not going to protect your information, and it's not going to keep them from taking them. Because I guarantee if you open it, they're going to look through it, they're going to download it. If they see something interesting, they're going to take it anyways.
So if you refuse to open it and they take it, how long can they keep it?
They can keep it indefinitely. Technically, according to them, they can keep it indefinitely. We have people who come to our office. We're usually very successfully able to get them back within a week or two from the time we file requests for them. And on the cases that we can't get them back, we do move forward towards litigation to make them give them back.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sister. Walaikum salam.
What a beautiful formative lecture. Thank you so much.
Inshallah.
Have you seen where they question children at the border?
So technically, it is still illegal to question children who are under 17 without their parent present. However, we do know of people who have been as young as 10 or 11 who have problems at the border upon entry who are questioned, and usually with their parents present. If your child is 16 or 17, they sometimes will demand to question them without a parent. So we have seen it. It's not as common. It's not that common, but it does take place from time to time. Yes.
If the officer asks me to open the phone, and I have no problem with that, but I have a problem with him being a male officer searching my album because of some female pictures of my relatives. Can I request that a female officer, and do they have to yield?
So you can make the request, and no, they don't have to yield. If you've consented to the search of your phone, out of respect, they may let a female officer search, and they may not. They may say we don't have anybody available. You could condition your consent to opening the phone on them bringing a female officer to search through the albums, but once you've opened your phone, whoever you open it for has complete access to everything inside your phone, and they're not going to let you pick and choose what they see. Oh yeah, let's pass this one.
Yeah. Also, the additional comment is that let's say that they concede and they have a male officer who looks at it, a female officer, because you have pictures of female relatives who are uncovered. Irrespective, they can take your device and download all of your pictures anyway, right? So it's better not to even open it up to begin with, because they can say, oh, okay, we'll get a female officer, and look at it, and then they still take all of your pictures, and then males and females look at it, and your pictures are in a database.
Yes, sister. Welcome, son.
Is there a Know Your Rights cheat sheet for this?
It's on our website, right? We have it on our website, right? Yes, so if you go to cairmichigan.org, www.cairmichigan.org, we have our Know Your Rights materials downloadable on our off of our internet website. And I think there was a question over here. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
So if you refuse to unlock your phone or refuse to answer questions that are not pertaining to why you traveled, how does that interaction go? Do they just say okay, or do they detain you longer, or like what happens after you refuse?
So that's a very good question. Her question is, what happens if you refuse to answer questions or open your phone? Do they detain you longer? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. So for U.S. citizens, there's like a threshold amount of time that they can hold you before that turns into an in-custody interrogation. Once they've triggered that time frame and you're considered to be in custody and they're not releasing you, because they can, as a U.S. citizen, there's no reason why they can keep you from entering the United States. Their options are to let you in the United States or arrest you. That's literally the only two options they have for U.S. citizens at the border. So once it's the time frame has passed and it looks like you're in custody for an interrogation, that triggers your right to counsel, to have an attorney come and be present at the border. They really, really don't like that. They really push back. They really say that you don't have a right to an attorney at the border, which is true if you're being inspected. Inspected has a very specific meaning. That means you've come from somewhere else and they're inspecting you to make sure that you're not bringing any contraband back in the United States that is not permitted here, like fruits and vegetables, illegal narcotics, things like that. But if they keep you long enough and it turns into in custody, you have a right to an attorney. So for U.S. citizens, it's usually a finite amount of time, and the general amount of time is 3 hours or sometimes 4 hours. If you're getting up to 3 to 4 hours, you should start demanding an attorney at the border. And you use the terms, I feel like I'm in custody, I want an attorney. And then they'll usually let you go. Sometimes if it's really apparent that you're not going to answer questions, they're just going to release you. If you're very strong and you're saying, I'm not going to answer your questions that are not related to my border entry, they'll just let you go because they don't want to stress it. So, but if we're like wavering where we're answering some questions and not others, and they think that they can get us, they'll keep us there to try to see if they can get us because we've been there too long. And with your cell phone, it's the same thing. Like they either want your cell phone bad enough that they're going to take it anyways, or they're just going to let you go with it if they realize you're not going to let them open it.
Do they have the right to investigate your children without your consent if they take it to a separate room?
Technically, no. So technically, children at the border are still protected if they're under 17. So 16 is the cutoff.
So what do you do if the officer puts them to a separate room?
Anytime that something's happening at the border that we don't like, the first thing we should be doing is asking for a supervisor, and the second thing we should be doing is collecting all of the officers' names that we're dealing with. They push back on giving you their name. They'll tell you they don't have to, but if you're very firm and you're like, I want your supervisor here right now, what you're doing is illegal, the supervisor will usually go and get the children and bring them back. And most of the time, anytime a child is questioned without their parent and they're under that age and they're at a tender age, that's considered an involuntary statement for the most part. So anything that they get from the child, they cannot use anyways. There are many, many ways to challenge it. So it actually doesn't benefit them. Where we see this issue is when you have children that are 15, 16, 17 years old. 17 years old, they can take them without a problem and question them. 16, they'll do it and see if they can get away with it. 15 also, they'll do it and see if they can get away with it. So we don't see this really a lot with younger children very often, but sometimes when you have those older teenage kids that are just on the cusp of 18, we might see that happening from time to time. I mean, so one of the things that started causing the increase in the detentions and seizures at the border are the sanctions on Iran. As soon as the sanctions in Iran came out in, I think 2019, the end of 2019, we started seeing a lot more problems at the border. And they'll stop you and ask you questions that are wholly inappropriate, like how do you feel about the sanctions in Iran? Like that's how we know it's linked. It's unequivocal that that's linked. With regards to the seizures at the border, it has been happening more and more. But since this court case came out in New York in February of this year, they've really been emboldened, because now in the Sixth Circuit, which is where Michigan is, you have to have some evidence that there's a crime that's been committed, and there's evidence of that crime on the electronic device to take it. But the appeals court in New York said that's not true. You can take it regardless. It's just like luggage, and you can search anything you want. So now CBP is kind of pushing their luck to see how far they can push this and see whether or not it's going to be challenged in other jurisdictions like where we are in Michigan. So they're waiting to see if the appeals court in Michigan is going to follow what happened in New York, or if they're not, to see if they can push this issue to the Supreme Court, to see if they can get a ruling from the Supreme Court that in fact it's constitutional to search a electronic device just like luggage. That's really what they're looking for. And we won't know that until it gets to the Supreme Court. But the magic words they use are like national security. National security are like magic words in the court system, and the court is very remiss to challenge any assertion of national security interests.
Just an additional comment, because she mentioned Iran, and it's true that we saw an uptick of complaints. And this really began at the very end of the Trump administration. And just for some clarification, the Trump administration in the very end had designated a number of institutions as terrorist organizations, including the Waqf that runs the Masjid of Imam Ali al-Rida alayhi salam. We were able to get clarification through the Biden administration, alhamdulillah, in the Department of Treasury, with the help of our Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, that the United States government does not treat it as material support. If anyone goes to make ziyarah, that goes to pray in that masjid, even like to give a little money to a miskin or a fakir who is there, that is not something that is chargeable, just to let you all know, because that was a concern for us once they got designated. Like, subhanAllah, they could be treating every person who makes ziyarah like an irhabi, right? So, alhamdulillah, through in this current administration, we got clarity on that. So, alhamdulillah, I just want to let you know it's safe for you to go to Iran to make ziyarah to the shrine of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam.
Sure. So just for clarification, 2 Facebook accounts is not illegal. Lying to the FBI about how many you have is the illegality. One of the most important things to do when you're traveling specifically to Iran, in Iraq, and Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, where there might be some types of sanctions going on, accidental violations of the sanctions are not usually chargeable. You have to have intent to knowingly violate the sanctions. With that being said, you can go to the OFAC website, OFAC, and you can get a list of entities that are sanctioned, and those entities are prohibited from getting money, from getting medicine, from getting food donations, from getting clothing donations. So it's not just our money. One of the things that will get you in the most trouble under the sanctions is either doing business with somebody that's on the sanctions, and that could be like giving a speech there, or giving money to entities that are on the sanctions list. So you can find a list of everybody, all of the entities in the sanctions list at OFAC.
Just for clarification purposes, the Hawza at Qum, right? If anyone is officially attached to that and is currently a student, that is an era of jeopardy, because that institution was designated as a terrorist organization. The Hawza in Qum has been designated as a terrorist organization, and we actually know of a client that came to our office recently who came to us, who actually was a student there, who may be in some trouble, right? So that's just clarifying. Until that is released, we do not recommend anyone to enroll at the official hawza that is funded through that waqf that has been designated in Qum. If someone's going to study with scholars privately outside of the actual institution, that's fine. But if you're going to the actual institution, that institution in Qum has been designated as a terrorist organization, and you could be potentially getting caught up by even just giving them money or officially enrolled of giving what's called material support to a terrorist organization, which could get you in federal prison for a long time. And that's longer than just 7 years, right? So that's one of those great issues that we need to know about. Making ziyarah to the masjid of Fatima al-Ma'suma, that's fine. But to actually be enrolled at the hawza, that's a problem.
And last point on your question, and then we're going to go to the gentleman at the table in the back who had his hand up like a lot of times. But the last point to answer your question is 99% of the people that we see at the airport that have had some sort of airport experience with questioning or electronic seizures are not accused of committing any crime. They're not charged with any crime ever, and they've actually committed no crime. That's not the intent of questioning them at the border, honestly. It's just not. That's what we've seen, and we have empirical data that shows that. And that, yes, in the back. No, but right behind you. Okay, go ahead. He waved his question.
I was just curious. Do they ever give reasons for why they designate certain organizations the way that they do?
They have not given any reasons. They don't have to give any reasons. They usually, if you ask for reasons, will cite national security, which is completely will shut down any further conversation about that.
And another question, like if hypothetically, like you were part of some organization before they declared it such, but you are since gone, is that person still under the threat of being in trouble?
So not legally. If you're part of an organization and then you've left the organization before the designation, there's no threat of legal jeopardy. If you leave the organization right after it's been designated, also it's very unlikely that there's any threat of legal jeopardy for you because it looks like you're complying with the sanctions, right? If you stay there, there is a problem. However, what we've seen is if you've had any form of affiliation, generally recently with an organization that's been designated under OFAC, you will likely get a visit from the FBI.
And so that website that you stated is the best way to keep up with such sanctions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then the gentleman at the back table.
When the officers question, is there any consequences for them if they push the limit?
So far, no, not really, to be honest with you. Yes and no, I guess, is the answer. If they knowingly violate what is considered to be your well-established, this is very legal terms, but well-established constitutional right at the border, then yes, they could be subject to financial penalties personally. There was a case that came out from the Supreme Court this year or last year, Tanzine, this year? This year, that held accountable individual customs officers who were inspecting people at the border with Canada up in Washington, held them personally financially responsible for violating constitutional rights by knowingly targeting people of Iranian descent as they re-entered the United States. So yes and no, but it's very, very, very difficult to bring that type of lawsuit and to sustain that type of lawsuit, because there are so many nuances with regards to what is your right and what is not your right at the border. And we do file civil rights complaints, and I have on many occasions spoken with the Port Authority and the director of CBP at the Metropolitan Airport here in Detroit regarding things that we found problematic that have been done and said by specific officers when we have those officers' names. So we have that open line of communication where we put people on notice that what we think they're doing is a violation of the law. So, go ahead, sister.
What about when they say that your name or a person, like a child that you're with, their name has been flagged because their name is the name of somebody that is on some kind of list or something that you've never heard of? Like every time we go to
I would encourage you to contact our office. There might be something that we can do to help that 17-year-old. But it is common, especially in certain communities, certain names are very much, very prevalent. And my daughter's name is Aisata, which in my husband's community, every other girl that you've ever met in your entire life is named Aisata. So that would be a very common name. And if they said that she had somebody who had the same name as her, I wouldn't even blink twice, because I'd be like, yes, obviously. So it happens from time to time, especially if they're a minor. That's probably more so the case, that's what's happening. And we do know of instances where people have been flagged starting at like 5, 6 birth, really, who have similar names to people on one of the several lists that they maintain, including the watch list, the no-fly list, and the selectee list, and things like that. There are ways to get that child off of the list, and I would encourage you to contact our office and see what we can do to see if we can maybe clear that issue up for the whole family. Because what we don't want to do is have that child go into adulthood with that problem, and then the problem escalates as they get older, and it becomes more difficult to clear it up. Yeah, sister and then brother.
Have you ever seen the reverse capture? Like, do people come to issues with like going to Canada? Does this happen?
So we've had people that have come to us that have issues going into Canada. However, there's nothing we can do about it. Like literally each country has the rights to control their border. It's inherent in being an independent country. And we refer those cases out to immigration attorneys in Canada. But yeah, especially this year, apparently a lot of people accidentally or maybe not accidentally violated Canada's COVID protocols. And we've seen a lot of people get turned back around at the Canadian border. But really there's nothing we can do about that, because that's up to Canada to determine who's in and who's out. So we would refer somebody like that to an attorney in Canada, I think.
So for licenses that I've applied for in the past, my name has come up on the OFAC list and I have to get clearance.
Yeah.
Is there a way of doing that permanently?
Call our office and we'll see what we can do for you. That's something that we can help you work on. And I think the sister in the back had a question. Somebody had a question back there.
Right there.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Excuse me. I was just curious if it makes any difference in the device if you have it on you, carry on, or it's in the checked-in baggage.
No, not really. So, no. If you have cell phones and you're checking them into your baggage, the CBP is going to find that to be suspicious, to say the least. So, not really. And if they're going to check you for secondary screening, they're definitely going to